This podcast contains our own personal views not associated with any organisation. Coronial contains descriptions of death inquests that may be graphic and disturbing to some listeners. Discretion is advised. All right, welcome back to Coronial. I'm Georgie.
I'm Emma.
And I'm Alice.
And this week I am going to be telling you guys about the death of Andrew Keith Seaton, who died at Watson's Crags in the Kosciuszko National Park in New South Wales on September the 3rd, 2022. Andrew was 24 at the time of his death, and he was a local around that area-ish. He loved enjoying being able to access the Snowy Mountains, which is Australia's highest mountain range, during the winter months. During his years at university, he became an experienced and proficient skier. And in addition to skiing at resorts, Andrew had developed an interest in backcountry skiing, which involves skiing in areas outside of resorts. He had completed a number of day trips to ski in the backcountry areas and had undertaken some avalanche training in relation to this to help with his safety.
That seems like a smart idea.
Yeah. A lot of the Australian skiers report that the more concerning part of skiing in backcountry in Australia is the icy stretches rather than necessarily avalanche risk, which I found interesting.
Yeah, is that just because we don't have enough snow?
Yeah.
Height of a mountain either, yeah.
Mm.
So, as I said, he passed away on the 3rd of September 2022. So on the 2nd of September, the day prior to his death, it was a Friday, and he drove 2 hours from his home in Downer, Australian Capital Territory, to Jindabyne in New South Wales, which is approximately a 2-hour drive according to Google Maps. He packed the gear that he required for a 1 day of skiing that he had planned, which included his skis, obviously. Ski
Hopefully
gear.
you don't forget those.
Barefoot skiing.
Yes.
You're just running down a mountain.
That's what backcountry skiing is. So you're not,
It's like cross-country running.
yeah, but in like deep snow.
Yeah.
Anyway, his skis, his ski gear, and a personal locator beacon. So
Oh,
I
good
am
on
so
him.
excited that he took a PLB with him.
Great.
Did it work?
I
Did it
can't
have
answer
batteries
that.
and okay?
It was not used, was it?
It wasn't used,
Okay.
so I can't answer that.
Yeah, okay.
During his travels, he informed his mother of his plans to go skiing, which is,
Good.
helpful. So he spent the night in his car, which was his normal plans, and then the next morning he drove to, I'm going to hope that this is the pronunciation of Gathiga,
Sounds
Not
good
sure.
to me.
and then drove the next morning to the car park where he was going to leave his car, arriving there by 7:30 a.m. so that he could then go backcountry skiing in the Kosciuszko National Park. Typically, he would spend the day skiing before returning to his vehicle, spending a further night there in his car, sleeping it off, and then driving home the next morning back to Australian Capital Territory. I think it was, Downer, I think is in Canberra-ish area.
Did he take food with him? Like, how was
Presumably,
he feeding
but-
himself?
It doesn't actually say.
Because, like, obviously there's no... When he's going skiing during the day, he's not
Yeah.
coming across a cafe and having lunch.
yeah, especially because he's not in a resort.
Mm.
It didn't go into how he fed himself, but it said he went prepared to do that, and it wasn't the first time he had done
Yeah,
that. So
right.
I presume by ski gear, it includes some snacks or food
And
for you,
water
like,
and-
marathon runners would take stuff to keep them sustained across a
Yeah.
day.
Yeah.
At the end of his skiing day on the Saturday, he would typically then check in with his mother again, or one of his parents, to inform them that he'd returned to his car safely.
Oh, yeah, that's smart.
On the day of his death, Andrew was seen around the middle of the day skiing along Watson Crags ridgeline, heading in a westerly direction. One of the witnesses who encountered Andrew on the day stated at the inquest that Andrew appeared to be a competent skier who was appropriately equipped and was not acting cocky. So
Yeah,
from all accounts, it sounds like he was doing all of the right things, that there was no sort of reason to be concerned about him going backcountry skiing.
Yeah, he was
on
well
his own.
prepared,
Yeah.
but he also wasn't taking unnecessary risks.
Yeah. Is it common for people to go backcountry skiing alone?
I feel like no.
Not alone. I
Yeah.
think it does happen, and one of the
Yeah.
witnesses at the inquest just then sort of said, but if they are going alone, that particular person at the inquest was like, I am exceptionally cautious. I do like easier runs. I
Yeah.
don't take any unnecessary risks versus if you're in a group, then maybe you might go on the harder trails. You might
Yeah.
go like a couple of them were talking about how they were there that weekend camping out around in these areas and stuff like that. And that just, they made an igloo, all this kind of stuff.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I'm honestly surprised there were witnesses. Like, it sounds like backcountry skiing is quite remote. And yet there were other people sort of in the vicinity.
But I guess there are kind of like areas that would be reasonable
Yeah,
trails.
they're still in
Yeah.
Kosciuszko, like National Park. Yeah.
And I assume there's also entry points. So it
Yeah,
may be
true.
that they came across each other as they were going in or coming out.
Yep.
That kind of thing. So by the evening of the 3rd, Andrew's mother, so the Saturday night, had not received her usual contact from him, informing her that he was, ready and, planning on returning home the next day.
Yep.
Additionally, he had not been active online, nor had he been in touch with his girlfriend. So this is starting to get suspicious and concerning that he's not made it back. By 9 p.m, her concerns grew enough that she contacted the Jindabyne police station. For whatever reason, this call actually ended up being diverted to Queanbeyan Station, which is located in New South Wales, 20 minutes southeast of Canberra, and then he's 2 hours south of that in the Kosciuszko area, which Jindabyne is the closest police station. Logistics-wise, I don't think that matters particularly much, but I'm just like, it wasn't the closest.
Yep.
Andrew's mother informed the constable who took the call that she was worried that her son had not contacted her following his day skiing, as was his usual plans.
Yep.
She stated his beacon had not been activated and that she was unaware of exactly where he was. So all she actually knew was he's left ACT and gone into New South Wales to go skiing. That's basically the amount of information that she knew.
Yeah.
But that said, like, it's Australia. There aren't that many places you can ski in September.
Yes, but when you're trying to find one single person
Yeah.
somewhere
In an
on a
entire
mountain,
national park,
yeah, it makes it slightly more challenging. The constable themselves tried to contact Andrew by phone, at which point he did not answer, and then created an incident for broadcast to the local Jindabyne police station, which was immediately acknowledged by local officers.
Cool. So there were actually police in that police station.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. So further discussion then occurred between these local police in Jindabyne and Andrew's mother to again try to figure out where he might be, and also discuss, were there other plans that he could have made? Could he have gone somewhere else? Could he have camped? Could he have done other things? She said it was unlikely that he would have done anything other than his normal plans, and informed them that he didn't have camping gear. During this conversation, a local ski location, Thredbo, which we've talked about, was mentioned. And Andrew's mother sort of, hearing a name familiar was like, oh yeah, that's maybe where he could have started out from.
Yep.
So the constables proceeded to patrol the campgrounds and car parks on the way to Thredbo in the search for Andrew's car to see if they could find him. This search was unsuccessful, and hence further contact was made to Andrew's mother and then ultimately to Andrew's girlfriend. And it was with communication with the girlfriend where she mentioned that she thought he could be camping at Guthaga.
Gotcha.
And so the constables again set out trying to locate his car, and by 11 p.m. they were able to locate his car in that car park where he had left it.
Mm-hmm.
It was locked and there were no snow gear or skis seen inside the vehicle. So the constables left a note on the driver's door asking Andrew to contact his mother or the police.
And they're just thinking, yeah, that's totally normal that it's 11 o'clock at night and he hasn't returned to his car.
And we're just going to leave him a note just so he can just call us when he gets back to his car.
But also yeah, he's just sleeping in the snow somewhere. That's fine.
I was like, they just left him a note. What?
I think leaving him a note is fair enough if they're doing something else. Just, as a backup, if he does come back in an hour, then at least
while
he
we're
knows. Yeah, while we're
getting
doing
the
something
rescue
else.
crews together, getting the search party. Or
Yeah, don't get me wrong. Okay, fine. Maybe I'm being a bit harsh.
But
about the
also,
note.
call your mum.
I know. They said mum or police.
Yes.
Yeah.
And look, I get that if it's a bushwalk and it's 4 in the afternoon and someone's worried about you, but
Yeah.
11 p.m. at night and there's no ski gear on it. Skis are pretty big.
Yes.
If there's no
Yeah.
skis in the car, clearly he's not come back to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or I don't ski, but do you wander around with your skis if you then go off
No.
somewhere else?
And I
would've
don't
thought you would
think so.
Yeah.
I feel like in that kind of area, it's very little chance that he's gone off and done something else without having come back to his car.
Yeah.
And taken
What
his
else is
car.
there to
what else
do?
is he doing?
Yeah, exactly. But
Unless
anyway.
he's building himself an igloo. Maybe that's what they assumed, that he was, like these other people
Maybe
who
he's
were
camping.
Yeah, it does very
Yeah.
much sound like they were very maybe he's just gone, he's met some people and he's just decided to camp.
Yeah.
Don't know how many people are camping out in the snow, but I'm also...
I certainly would not.
At least one of the witnesses,
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So it is like a thing that people do.
apparently.
Okay.
Okay, so from there, Andrew's case was reviewed by the acting inspector at the police station, the local one, who completed a search urgency assessment tool, which is a scored tool according to different factors relating to the person who we're worried about and the risk to them. The score of 29 was produced using this tool, and that indicated that police should evaluate, monitor, and advise.
What does that
What
mean?
does that even mean?
It means evaluate, monitor, and advise. That is all I can tell you.
Sounds like a really stupid tool.
Yeah, what's like the scale? Where's 29 on the scale?
Is it
I don't
to
know.
100? Is it
Yeah,
to
is it to
50?
I don't know. I can't tell you.
Is it to 30 and it's like real extreme?
No, evaluate,
No, it
monitor, and
wouldn't be.
advise seems fairly like consider doing something versus
You
do
need
something
to do
now.
right now. Yeah.
Yeah. So therefore, Andrew's case was handed over for the subsequent day shift to continue follow-up inquiries. Additionally, the case was recorded as an occurrence only in the police database rather than a formal missing persons report, which we'll also come to.
Yeah, I was going to say, I feel like his mother would disagree with that. Like, she's specifically calling them saying,
I am concerned.
Yes.
Yeah, we're gonna have a long discussion around this. There's more to this. Anyway, in the statement provided at the inquest by the acting inspector, and I should say it was a written statement, they didn't actually physically appear at the inquest. They explained that their rationale for the decision to monitor included that Andrew was in possession of a PLB, which had not been activated, that he was an experienced and skilled skier, knowledgeable about the terrain and its hazards, and had no medical or mental health conditions, and a reasonable level of fitness.
and yet on the other hand, he had never failed to contact someone when he came back.
No matter how good his medical
Yeah.
health is, you can't survive freezing overnight.
Yes. Even how good your physical health is.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, none of these have a impact on if you fell over and knocked yourself out.
yeah. And then
Yeah.
you're stuck in the snow.
Yeah.
Now, about the contacting, there was a very minor point in there of there was some controversy around whether he did contact his mum every time,
Yeah, okay.
but it didn't seem emphasized enough in the inquest for the coroner to have thought that that was entirely accurate, valuable information. So it was a like, maybe someone somewhere said maybe he doesn't do it all the time, but it wasn't like there was clear inconsistency that he definitely didn't every time.
Yeah.
And even then, she was worried.
I was about to say
Yes,
the fact that
yeah.
she was
So, like-
concerned, and had
Yep.
she gone to this extent
Yeah.
when she'd been concerned previously? Like, is
Exactly,
this the first time
yeah, true. There was
she's
no,
gone to the police or anything?
it wasn't detailed, so I can only assume the
Yeah.
answer is no,
Yeah.
because I would have thought if that had happened before,
It
she
would
would have said something.
like, okay,
Yeah,
this
yeah.
is actually a pattern of behaviour,
Yeah.
whereas it's not.
So the following day, police continued to make inquiries about Andrew's whereabouts. This included returning to his vehicle, speaking with other skiers in the area, and inquiring as to whether Andrew may have rented camping equipment.
Did they leave another note?
It didn't say.
Maybe they removed their first note.
Presumably the note was still there.
Yeah.
I can't imagine anyone had taken it. It was determined by the acting inspector that escalation should occur if Andrew failed to return to Canberra by the evening. So as in, like, the impression to me was like, maybe he got a lift with someone else for whatever reason. So they were like, we'll just wait and make sure he doesn't show up in Canberra.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-mm.
Anyway.
I disagree.
Yeah. I was like, okay, sure.
That's really odd.
Yeah. It was reported in the inquest findings that during this time, Andrew's family did not feel that the police were taking their concerns seriously.
Yeah, fair enough.
And I somewhat agree. And by this point, the family, they'd all come to Jindabyne. They had
Wow,
all gotten
okay.
in their vehicles and been like, we are here. Tell us what you need. It was in the late afternoon, another search urgency assessment tool was completed, which indicated this time a measured response should occur. Police initially commenced by returning to Andrew's vehicle and gaining access to it. In the vehicle, they located his wallet, 2 maps, which unfortunately weren't marked with any information about his planned trails, but no skiing equipment or PLB.
Did they check to make sure the car wasn't mechanically
They
having a
didn't say
problem, and that's
anything.
why
yeah,
he
but
may
surely,
He would have taken his wallet with him?
have? Yeah, and you would have
Yeah.
left the skis in the car.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like if you were getting a lift with someone to go get a tow
Like,
truck
he had
or
a phone on
something.
him.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mention it, but like on the day that he was skiing, he did message his girlfriend while he was on the slopes at some point.
Yeah, right.
Like, you know, it's weird that he's not been on social media, that he's not contacted anyone, all that kind of stuff is also weird.
Yeah.
So he had started out with the phone. And I think that's also the part where it's like, well, even if he decided to go camping with friends or met someone or whatever, why did he not contact anyone?
Yeah, and why didn't he answer the phone either?
Yeah. And the argument is, oh, well, maybe he was out of reception. But then again, it didn't seem like he was that kind of individual that wouldn't then have some sort of like, does someone have a GPS signal phone that I can use or something? You know, something. Like, it seemed out of character for him to have made that decision.
Yeah.
If he had it. So following this, so by about 5:30 p.m., so this is 36 hours after he set off skiing, they began planning a search for Andrew. A rescue coordinator was contacted and a helicopter was organised. Additionally, the Alpine Operation Unit, New South Wales Ambulance, National Parks and Wildlife Service and the State Emergency Service were all contacted in order for a search to be commenced. But because it was 5:30 p.m, the search was essentially going to start the following day.
Right.
But they were starting to get the troops together to be able to do that.
I just don't understand why they wouldn't have made that call
The first night?
the day
Yeah,
before,
it
being
doesn't
like,
make
hey,
sense.
just as in even just giving them a heads up of there's someone who
Is missing.
but
Not formally.
we think he might still be around. He might be still coming back to his car, but
Yeah.
just get ready.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I understand the concept of, still making the inquiries and everything, but we'll come to, like, why didn't these happen simultaneously?
Yeah.
Essentially. Yeah. So shortly after this, a friend of Andrew's reported to the police that Andrew may have been skiing towards Watson's Crags. This friend stated that he gained this information by posting in a Facebook skiing group and asking if anyone knew information on the whereabouts of Andrew. So this is the first sort of potential information we have about anything beyond the fact that his car was in that car park.
Yeah.
Right.
That evening, a helicopter did do a flyover, but they weren't able to locate him at that point, and I think that would have been a visibility issue.
Yeah.
You know, it just wasn't an ideal timing to be doing a flyover with a helicopter after dark.
No. I mean, you're not going to yield the results that you usually would in the daytime. And how, like, bushy is the area?
Yeah, backcountry makes me think that it's at least a little bit.
Maybe, but also he's on a ridge line. Or he was skiing
Oh,
from
okay.
a ridge line-ish area. So
Yeah.
like when I looked at the photos in the inquest, it looked mostly rocky, snowy rather than
then tree snowy.
Forest snowy.
Yeah.
So a ground search was commenced on the Monday morning, almost 48 hours after he'd gone out skiing. But obviously this is like terrain, again, rocky, top of a mountain.
Yeah.
So by ground, they couldn't really cover that much, and they didn't really have specialised personnel at that point. They'd contacted Alpine personnel, but at that point they were just starting with like the people that are around.
Yeah, right.
Unfortunately, due to bad weather, a helicopter was unable to commence a search of the area until about 2 p.m. that day. So ideally they would have started that earlier, but bad weather. Shortly after commencing, within an hour, the aerial search identified Andrew's skis initially, and then were able to subsequently find his body a few hundred metres from Watson's Crags Ridge.
Oh, dear.
So the skis were not
They're
still
not
on
with him. They were a distance away from him.
They are a distance away from him.
He fell over?
He did fall over.
Mm-hmm.
During the inquest, it was determined that Andrew most likely lost control due to the snow conditions and possibly icy patches, causing him to fall a moderate distance before he landed in a rocky area called Crags Creek.
Ow.
And so this rocky area was also damp with like a little bit of river and water flow. Review of images taken by this aerial search crew was then reviewed by someone from the search and rescue team, and it was determined that there was very little possibility that he was still alive. Unfortunately, rescuers were unable to retrieve him that evening.
So had they gone out, like, on their search and rescue, thinking that they were going to find someone alive?
I don't know.
In terms of
I feel
what
like
they brought with them?
you would go out surely hoping to find them injured. And therefore you would
Yes.
need to like get them out of there. So you would need the same equipment.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think he was in such a difficult location.
Right.
They would have had to have sent
They
someone
needed
down.
specialised
Yeah.
equipment.
It was snowy. It was not great weather that day. Visibility wasn't great.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, they ended up retrieving him the next day.
Yeah.
And the coroner said this was described as a technically difficult and dangerous operation because
Right.
rescuers had to be left on steep mountainside in precarious position before the helicopter was able to assist with retrieving Andrew's body.
Yeah, right.
So, I mean, we've talked about the canyon rescue
Yes.
Yeah.
before and how dangerous. And, you know, they spent hours determining a plan and everything like that because they knew the location of the individuals anyway.
Mm.
Whereas this first helicopter went out looking for him and didn't actually even know his location, so couldn't
Yeah.
make a plan as to like
What
how they would do it.
Mm.
And then even then they're like, even the personnel we've brought with us are not technically skilled enough to do it today,
Yeah.
or the equipment or whatever. We have to do this with more time, more planning, more people,
Yeah.
etc.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's unreasonable that they
That's
couldn't
fair.
retrieve
Yeah.
him. And at that point, the time pressure, I guess,
Is
had been
alleviated.
relaxed a little bit
Yeah,
because they
yeah.
said there is no chance that he is still alive.
Yeah.
Mm.
In the following weeks, Andrew's skis and PLB were located and retrieved along Watson's Crags as well.
Okay.
So other backcountry skiers ultimately ended up retrieving them and returning them as well. An autopsy revealed that Andrew had sustained a severe head injury and other extensive injuries consistent with a fall from height. And the pathologist who conducted the autopsy reported that his death was likely near instantaneous.
Mm.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
something. At least it wasn't the fact that it took so long for them to find
Yeah.
him that meant that he died.
Absolutely. Yeah. So ultimately, by the time that his mother had reported her concerns, he
was
was
already
likely
dead.
already deceased.
Yep.
The major issues discussed at the inquest focused on backcountry skiing and whether there's appropriate regulations in place for those individuals partaking in the sport, whether the response of the New South Wales Police Force to the report that Andrew was missing was adequate and in accordance with the relevant policies, whether the risk assessment was appropriate in terms of determining whether to do the search, whether the initial police response to the report was adequate. Lastly, was the search and rescue operation appropriate, timely, and conducted with sufficient resources? So in terms of backcountry skiing, I don't understand because I'm not a skier, but from what I could tell, you know, ski resorts have designated runs with like indications as to their difficulty and, you know, are all well maintained and, you know, you can't really go on them if they're not appropriate for skiing on.
Mm.
Whereas the backcountry skiing is essentially outside of resorts in areas of mountainous, snow-covered areas. And so that very much requires people to be proficient at skiing, requires them to understand the area and the risks and how to look out for hazards and all those kinds of things when they go because they're not getting these like beautiful, pristine locations set up for them.
I assume you don't have to pay to go backcountry skiing either. Like,
No.
I mean, you might need a permit to access a particular national park
Yeah,
or whatever,
But
but
other than
yeah.
that, I wouldn't
Yeah.
think there is anything.
It's within the national park. So
Yeah.
yeah, whatever access to the national park is kind of what you need.
yeah. Whereas typical skiing is extremely expensive, even to get like lift passes and stuff.
Fair. Yeah,
It's
true.
very
I hadn't even
expensive.
thought about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So that would make the appeal a little
Yeah,
bit
but
higher
you'd
for
still
them
have to be very proficient at skiing to be able to do it. So I'm sure he would have had. But yes,
yes.
once you know how to ski, you'd be like, it's especially for a 24-year-old.
Yeah,
like,
like, why not?
yeah.
And he also
exactly.
really loved doing it. So
Yeah.
like doing it as much as possible, as cheap as possible, I
Yeah.
can totally understand.
Well, he's sleeping in his car the night before,
Yeah.
so he's
Yeah.
obviously trying to save money where he can.
Yeah. So a witness from the New South Wales Parks and Wildlife Service provided evidence that many groomed cross-country ski trails are marked within areas at Perisher Valley that do enable skiers to learn backcountry skiing in a relatively controlled environment. So that's kind of like your middle ground between a resort and full backcountry, I guess.
Yep.
But beyond that, most backcountry skiers will select their own unique routes outside of these more guided areas. In terms of Watson's Crags, so where Andrew was found, one experienced backcountry skier gave evidence at the inquest that it presents some of the most complex and technical skiing that exists in New South Wales. Additionally, the witness remarked that even under ideal conditions, a fall in a number of areas would likely lead to serious injury or death. So he was skiing in one of the most difficult terrains you could pick.
I'm sure
Yeah,
he was also conscious of that risk as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think you go out there.
Yeah, there's an
Wanting
assumed
that.
risk with these sorts of activities.
Absolutely. And you know,
Especially going alone.
the views looked spectacular, so I can also understand.
Was he wearing a helmet? Was that part of the standard gear that you would...
That is a
Where?
question I do not know the answer to. It was not mentioned at all, but
Really?
do
Interesting.
skiers wear helmets? I don't.
I have worn helmet while I've been skiing, but I've also not worn helmets.
I've definitely worn a helmet while snowboarding.
Would you do it if you're doing backcountry because you know that there's a higher risk?
Yes.
Like, I would have assumed
Just like if you're mountain
yes.
bike riding,
Yeah.
you're going to wear a helmet.
But I don't know.
Yeah, I just wonder if he wasn't wearing a helmet and he had been wearing one, whether that would have changed the outcome potentially.
His injuries were so, like, he had multiple injuries across his whole body, so let's assume most of his arms and legs
Yeah, okay.
got fractures. Wherever he landed, he wouldn't have been able to get out of, and it was running water, and he would have been there overnight if he'd been alive.
Yeah, true.
So he would have succumbed to his injuries,
Yep.
even if his head injury wasn't
Yeah,
so
I was
bad
about
that
to
he was
say.
instantaneously...
Okay, so it's good.
It's probably a mercy if he wasn't wearing a helmet.
Yeah.
In this circumstance, a limited circumstance.
I was going to say, but also, or if he was wearing a helmet, his head injury was still so bad that he sustained a
didn't matter.
serious
Yeah.
head injury. So,
Fair.
yeah. In terms of regulation, backcountry skiing is reasonably unregulated, not unexpected. And 2 witnesses experienced in backcountry skiing expressed the view that they think it didn't need any greater regulation or other safety measures, such as like gates to kind of, prevent the coming and going of people in those areas.
Well, yeah, it's just like if you go bushwalking in a national park and you go off the trail, like you are able to.
Yeah.
Whether you should or not is up to your own skills.
As long as you're not
abilities.
like damaging the environment in a harmful way,
Yeah.
then like that's your risk.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And even if you did have, like, who's going to be there to enforce the regulations
Yeah.
when you
Fair.
barely see anybody out there?
Exactly. Instead of formal regulation, New South Wales Parks and Wildlife Service do provide extensive guidance and advice to the public in relation to backcountry skiing through its website, affiliate websites, social media, and public notices throughout the Alpine regions. Additionally, a daily hazards report is available on one of the websites, which details snowpack stability, ice slide danger, weather, and then general other hazards that have been reported to them. In some of the most popular backcountry areas as well, they maintain signs which include safety advice and all have QR codes on them which link to certain things such as the trip intention form, the Alpine hazards reports, and then there's also these other snow poles which exist on some of the like more groomed areas to kind of mark out where you're going and keep you on that.
Yeah.
So it sounds like there's actually a really good amount of advice, not only before you go, but once you get there as well.
Yeah.
For the most part, but obviously you'd have to be going past those signs, which again, it sounds like they're, like just past the car park and all that kind of stuff. So there'd be a fair amount of areas that you would have to go past them, but I assume there's also other areas where you're going off track and don't actually see them.
Sorry, so do people, like, is there something that people, like, sign their names on to say they're, like...
Yeah, so this is something called a trip intention form. So essentially you
Yeah.
scan the QR code and then you can fill out the information.
Right. So
And
in other words, like, I mean, obviously this sounds like it's optional to do that, but at
Yeah.
least people would know, like, if someone's missing, hey, they definitely are out.
Exactly.
'Cause they
Yeah,
filled
they're
in
definitely
this
out
form.
there, like,
Yeah.
yeah, and they haven't returned.
And so this is the bit that they sort of like, we're talking about of, had he filled one out? The mother would have been able to like say, he was going here.
Yeah.
He was parking his car at this spot. He was planning on doing this run.
Yeah.
He's got his beacon. This is the beacon number because the numbers, they have a unique identifiable number, when he was planning to return so that like the police had more verifiable information around the fact that he definitely wouldn't be camping.
But again, it's whether you, like, enforce that those things are compulsory or it's,
I don't think you could ever enforce that it's compulsory, but I think the
No.
other thing is it doesn't go anywhere. It sits on the database and then they can access it should they need to.
Yeah.
And then obviously the person who gets sent it as the emergency contact, obviously they also have access to it.
Yeah.
But it's up to that person to raise the alarm. It's not, it's not like if you don't click a button by the time you said you were going to be back, it's not automatically
Yeah, of
raising an
course.
alarm or anything like
Yeah.
that. So yeah, basically you fill out all the information that it asks of you and then it automates getting sent to your emergency contact and they get a message saying, blah is planning on doing this.
They've essentially
so you're aware.
checked in at this location
Yeah.
and this is their plan.
Or you can do it, you can pre-fill it before you go and that
Oh,
kind of
yeah.
stuff. But yeah. One of the expert witnesses kind of mentioned as well, though, it can then limit the skiers' sort of flexibility if
True.
they've filled it out because they may either feel that they need to follow it because they've filled it out and they want to make sure that the person is aware of where they are, which could be dangerous if there's like a hazard or the weather changes or something and they feel they need to go that way. Or the opposite where because of said hazard, they do go the other way and therefore the trip intention form is unhelpful.
Yeah.
Or, isn't as intended.
Yeah.
But again, I guess filling one out probably still has some benefit, even if you then change your plans.
I think
Yeah.
so.
Because they would
Yeah.
know where to start and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff.
And especially if you get the EPIRB number.
Yeah.
Because can they locate that beacon even if it's not been like activated?
I don't know, but I think it's also just proof that they've taken one
Yeah, true.
as well. Because I think there was a lot of like, well, the beacon hadn't gone off, so therefore he's not in harm. Wait, although my
Yeah,
understanding is you
that's-
have to activate it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. If you
So-
are
yeah.
incapacitated to the point where you can't activate it.
Yeah,
then-
he fell, so it didn't
Yeah.
activate.
Yeah.
Yeah. Of the 4 experienced skiers who provided evidence at the inquest, only one of them reported that they used the trip intention form. And even then, this witness said they don't use it for every trip. However, that witness did say that they run a commercial business, that they encourage all of the people that they take out skiing to use it.
I was about to say, how widely known is the system amongst backcountry skiers?
It seemed like they all knew that they
Yeah,
existed.
okay.
Yeah. They were like, I just tell a loved one and I give them good detail about it. And I was
That's
like, look,
fair.
that's
Yeah.
fair. But then that then also puts the onus on the loved one in terms of that memory of where you've gone. Because like the
Yeah,
girlfriend in
that's
this was
true.
like, he told me he was going skiing, but I don't know any of these names or places. So
Mm.
like,
Didn't mean
Yeah.
anything. to her.
yeah.
And it
So-
may also be that they're with a group of people, like a group of friends going. So you're
Yeah.
like, well, we're all together. There's no point filling that form out.
Yeah.
Because what's the chances of all of us?
Being incapacitated.
Yeah.
Well, if you're out of signal, it doesn't really matter.
If someone's well enough, they can ski back to find help.
Yeah, fair. So, yes, they have their pros and cons. And then talking about the PLB, which, as I said, like, he was carrying one, but it does require you to activate it. Of note, it was mentioned by the New South Wales Parks and Wildlife Service, provide beacon hire for free to skiers, and then an average of 120 to 170 are hired by the public on an annual basis during the snow season. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's
that
a good
it turns
idea.
out if you don't have one, you can just go hire one from them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm like, excellent.
Yep.
That is an excellent service that they provide. One of the expert witnesses at the inquest did describe that there are plenty of alternatives as well, and that with newer technologies, things are improving. Benefits being things like one of them has a immobility alarm. So if you fall over and you don't have the ability to activate your PLB, this one will activate if you're immobile for like however
Right.
long.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
I assume much like an Apple Watch does.
Yep. Yep.
Additionally, there are some that give constant coordinate feedback and others that have messaging capabilities with them as well that are, presumably broader than the standard mobile reception. It was highlighted by this individual that they didn't feel that it was cost preclusive, but I did look them up and it seems like they go up to like $500 depending on the model. But I guess skiing is an expensive sport as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And if you're using it every time you go out and you go out regularly, then
additionally, along with the actual cost of it, you also then need a subscription to it as well, and that's like a monthly mobile service. So
Ugh.
yeah.
come on.
Any way to make money, right?
Yeah. And then they might have some limitations such as data access and privacy issues. So, for example, one of them was a US company, and so then it's monitored by a US team. And so getting access to the data in terms of if it were activated or like looking for their location, you'd have to go through them overseas, which becomes problematic. Or if you're wanting to like access the messaging service and stuff like that, it can be privacy issues, especially with relation to overseas companies and organizations, and protections of the individual's rights, which can be a pain. So they have some pros, they have some cons.
Mm.
Yeah.
The coroner found that based on the information provided at the inquest, the guidance available for backcountry skiers is adequate and comprehensive and didn't make any recommended changes. But continue to liaise regarding efforts to further explore ways to promote the use of the trip intention form for persons entering the areas and for technology which could be used to record a person's entry into and progress through the backcountry areas. So sorry, it was adequate, but as technology improves and things like that, try to encourage people to keep up to date.
Mm.
But honestly, like asking them to actively make changes.
Yep.
So whether the response by the police to the report that Andrew was missing was adequate and in accordance with relevant policy. An initial major concern was whether Andrew met the definition of a missing person and how this might have affected the outcome. At the inquest, a missing person was defined as any person reported missing to the police whose whereabouts are unknown and where there's a genuine fear for safety or concern for the welfare of that person.
There's no time period for that. I know, like, maybe it's just from watching too much TV.
I think there used to be.
Yeah, they're like, have they been missing for
A period of time or
Yeah.
anything like that.
Yeah, just
Nah,
like
no time period now.
back in the day, if your teenager disappeared, it's like, oh, they're just a runaway.
Yeah.
Wait a
Yes.
couple of days.
Yeah.
Whereas, now I think it's just
You're concerned
if
for
you're
their
concerned,
safety.
yeah.
Which I think is reasonable.
But also very valid the way that this mother explained it, of like, he's out doing a high risk activity and I've not heard from him.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, what's waiting 24 hours benefit,
Yeah.
right? So a couple of police expert witnesses felt that Andrew met the definition of being a missing person and emphasised that consideration as to whether to regard an individual as missing or not should take into account the views of the family or the person doing the reporting.
That's fair
Yeah.
as well.
And like, I think that's a really tough one because they talked about, well, what if people are reporting for negative reasons, such as in the context of like
Right.
TV and that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. I'm sure it is a very, very challenging thing to get right because there would be people inappropriately reporting people
Yes.
missing in order to determine their whereabouts.
Yeah.
So that can be problematic. It was detailed in the inquest that in order to complete a missing person report, the informant must provide the report in person, generally either at a police station or at their residence. So the witnesses described that completing a report in person allows the assessment of the informant's body language and like to establish the authenticity of the report.
Yeah, right. Because if you're doing it for the wrong reasons, you may not necessarily want the police at your house.
Yeah, or like your body language might just be like
Yeah,
off.
something will just.
Yeah,
Yeah.
something's not right.
And it probably also discourages people from, if you're
Inappropriately.
Yeah, exactly. If you can do it by phone, then more people are going to do it inappropriately because it's easier
Yeah.
to access. But if you actually have to go in person or have someone
Come
at
to
your
your
house,
house. then
Yeah,
it's
that's
more
harder.
effort.
Additionally, by the police having that person in person, it also facilitates some of the practical requirements of reporting a missing person, such as obtaining identification documents,
yeah,
DNA collection if necessary, and approvals from next of kin in terms of releasing that individual's information.
Yeah, right.
One of the witnesses was of the opinion that Andrew's mother should have been advised to attend a police station to complete a report so that Andrew could be formally listed as a missing person. The coroner found that Andrew met the definition of a missing person and agreed that, yes, his mother should have been notified and that she more than likely would have attended a police station to formalise the report.
Yeah, or they would have gone to her, or
Well,
sounds like
yeah,
she was willing to
But she
do
was
what she
calling
needed to do.
Jindabyne, which sent her to Queanbeyan, which she was nowhere near. So,
Yeah,
like,
true.
Queanbeyan couldn't go to her.
Mm.
So she should have just presented to whatever her closest was.
Police station was, yeah.
Yeah. Had Andrew been reported a missing person, the New South Wales Missing Persons, Unidentified Bodies and Human Remains Standard Operating Procedure would have been used to guide the response. This encouraged officers to consider the vulnerability of the missing person and rate the individual's risk. According to this procedure, Andrew would have been considered a high-risk missing person due to the weather conditions of the location where he was last known to be. Hence, an immediate search and rescue was recommended based on
Yes.
that procedure.
That makes sense.
However, in order to commence a search and rescue, a search urgency assessment tool is required to provide guidance about whether an immediate or measured response is needed or whether further inquiries should occur. This is the same risk assessment tool that they ultimately end up using.
The one that initially was just like essentially do nothing.
Yeah, evaluate, monitor, and
Advise. Who are they advising of what? I don't know.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. So the problem is, like, it's a bit circular.
Yeah.
So technically, if he had been reported missing, the thing that would have changed was that he would have been labelled high risk, essentially.
right.
Which
Mm.
I feel like that they probably already knew that anyway.
Yeah.
And that they would have sent them back to the same tool, that then the same tool would have been completed. The thing that would have otherwise happened was that he would have been formally listed on the missing persons register. And this would have led to the missing persons register being notified. But again, that's more of like a daily check thing. So I wouldn't have really done anything till the next morning either.
Yeah, okay.
However, by being on that, maybe it would have prompted a more specialised personnel response to assist with the investigation.
Right.
Because, presumably the missing persons register has a bunch of specialised
Yeah.
individuals.
Yeah.
And it might have then triggered the need to do something like put out public reports about it or something like that. And then so people would have been aware.
Or someone who
it was
has
out
experience with, reports of people going missing while skiing would have been like, search now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Or just the people who are out backcountry skiing would have been like, okay, I know that someone's out here missing.
Yeah.
I know what he looks like. Like, I'll just keep an eye out.
Or I'm going to like call the police because I saw him in this area
Yeah.
and just in case they don't know where he is.
Yeah.
It was detailed at the inquest that since 2022, the missing persons standard operating procedure has been updated. And one of these updates includes providing the family of a missing person with a single point of contact to reduce the repetitive questioning and emotional load on the family members.
Mm.
Additionally, evidence was provided that the next revision of the document would likely include information about the need for police to advise members of the public that they should attend a police station when reporting a person missing. And so one of the recommendations that the coroner made was that consideration should be given as to whether further training or instruction is required regarding the need to advise members of the public who report a person missing that they should attend a police station to do so. So the coroner was pretty keen on, yes, why did we not tell her that she formally needed to report her son missing by attending a police station?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, technically probably didn't actually make a difference.
Well, I think a lot of this doesn't make a difference in this case.
Yeah.
Fair.
I'm just thinking, like, if I hadn't heard all of this, would have I known if I knew someone who was missing to have gone into a police station?
No. I didn't realise you had to do that. I thought
Yeah, I
you just
agree.
call them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you would expect them to tell
Then
you.
tell you
What you need to
What
do.
you need to
yeah,
do.
exactly.
And so I cannot understand why she was not told.
Yeah, and you're in the situation where you're clearly very worried about someone.
yeah.
Yeah.
You're not necessarily thinking
thinking.
completely logically. You need someone to tell you that information.
Yeah, but there was kind of no explanation as to who, why, how. It just, yeah.
And it's probably that point that they talked about of there being like, you contact the police station and you're not guaranteed to be speaking to the same person each time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, like,
Yeah.
she's probably getting told different information and having to repeat herself
Yeah, several times. Oh,
several
absolutely.
different times. And it's just, yeah.
Yeah. That's kind of why they put that point in around a single point of contact, because it sounds like they were just going back and forth between the family over and over between different people of the family. And they're like, we've answered this several times now.
Yeah. Which
You
gets
know.
so frustrating.
Yeah. And yeah, sorry, I should have mentioned at the beginning of that's why I found this one incredibly interesting was the things like I didn't know about the cool new technologies that exist for tracking people who are out wherever, because, those technologies don't have to be applied just to skiing. They can be applied to bushwalking. They can be applied to anything that you're doing that's out of general range. The really interesting concept of the fact that, you have to attend a police station to be reported missing. And then, things around how search and rescues happen. And there's lots of stuff around, which I'm going to come to, but just because you need a search doesn't necessarily mean that people are available. And a lot of the witnesses in this inquest discuss the things around they felt the public just has this perception that if you need a search, it just happens.
Yeah, you're able to assemble a team and go.
When you're on a precarious mountain with snow in horrendous conditions, there's like maybe 10 experts in Australia that can help with that kind of rescue.
Yeah.
They've got to be nearby or get there. They've got to be available.
Yeah.
And then you've got to put a team together that can get to the exact location that you are, And so, like, that doesn't just happen. That takes time. So, again, even if they sent them out on the Sunday, the day after he was reported missing, how quickly would it actually have achieved things? Like, there's still a question as to how much quicker they would have identified him or where he was. Probably quicker.
Yeah, they definitely would have found where he
quicker.
was quicker. But whether or not they could retrieve him.
And all that kind of stuff is, true. The helicopter would have flown over. But again, getting that personnel available, still hard to tell. In terms of the risk assessment, one criticism made by one of the witnesses at the inquest was that this risk assessment tool did not take into account Andrew's lack of supplies for overnight camping, but just rather focus on the fact that he had enough for his day trip.
Yeah, which especially when you're in a snowy area, that's even more important.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's like, well, then why was this being used if it doesn't take that into account? So the witness felt a reassessment should have been performed taking into account those risks, which then would have changed the recommendation from evaluate, monitor and advise to a measured response, which then would have suggested the consideration of an escalation to a helicopter.
Yeah.
Or an active search. As Andrew's case was unfolding at such a late time in the evening, witnesses felt it was appropriate to have considered any search and rescue plan and could have targeted plans for the subsequent morning. So again, they didn't find his car till 11 p.m. It was totally appropriate to be like, okay, let's plan for tomorrow.
Yep.
Given he was known to be a backcountry skier, it was also suggested that this should have involved a large-scale search of the main ranges, such as by helicopter, to cover such a broad area, because, as I said, it's hard on foot to actually access those locations. In conjunction with this, police could have then continued their on-ground inquiries and searching and escalating as to whether he camped somewhere, went somewhere else, was on his way back to Canberra, etc. It was agreed by witnesses that air assets were the most appropriate to deploy, especially in mountainous and snowy terrain, given how slowly on foot searches would have been conducted. Additionally, one expert stated that the search and rescue manual states, never not do a search because you're waiting on a little bit of extra information. And hence search and rescue coordinators should not be afraid to deploy assets too early due to the concerns of not having enough information. Which I found really interesting here, because when we go back to the canyon rescue episode, the helicopter went to the wrong location because they didn't have the correct information. And I was like, oh, the irony.
Yeah, I suppose it depends on the information that you're missing.
Yeah, well, that was one where they made the mistake where they had a GPS location, but they listened to someone say that whatever location.
Yeah.
But they technically still did have the correct location. So there's a bit more
they should have relied
miscommunication
on
there.
the technology rather than the human.
But I was just like, oh, yeah, they should never not be afraid to go.
Unless they don't know where they're going.
Yeah, well, no, but this, they wouldn't have known where they were going either, because they just knew where his car was and they would have had to search from there. And that's what they're basically saying. That maybe the police officer didn't deploy the helicopter because he didn't know where to send the helicopter, because it's like, well, here's his car, please search the mountain.
Just do like a circular grid pattern sort of thing out from the car park and
go from there. But it's Australia's largest mountain range, so it's an area to cover.
Yes.
And, it's not flat ground, so. The coroner found the first risk assessment was not appropriate, the result of it, and that the second risk assessment, which suggested a measured response, was more appropriate and should have been the first that had occurred. The coroner found that on the basis of the expert evidence that a measured response should have occurred, which likely would have resulted in what's known as a reflex search in the first light, possibly involving a helicopter. As a reflex search essentially just means a search as a reflex to the report of a missing person.
Right.
It's kind of...
in the hopes that you're going to find them.
Yeah. So in summary, the coroner found that the search and rescue should have started the day before.
Yeah.
The coroner went on to state that although the search by helicopter would not have saved Andrew, that it may well have discovered his location sooner. And if a similar set of circumstances occurred in the future, it may be vital and the difference between life and death. So the rest of the search, was that adequate? So ignoring the fact that the helicopter should have gone out earlier, ultimately all of the evidence provided at the inquest suggested that the lines of inquiry were followed appropriately, the intelligence that they were gathering was appropriate to determine whether Andrew had travelled anywhere else. And that was entirely appropriate. It just should have been happening simultaneously to a bigger, more extensive search. And so all of those were appropriate. The resources there used were appropriate. And so the coroner didn't have any issues with the way that that was handled. But they did also discuss that since this inquest, there's also an increased emphasis on the use of social media and geolocation messaging services when a person is reported missing. So they'll put stuff out on their social media pages. And then there's also a technology where you can send a message out to anyone who's located in that location geographically, being like, please be advised, a person is missing.
Yep.
Was the search and rescue operation conducted with sufficient resources, which is basically what I was just talking about before of like, when you need such highly skilled personnel, did they do it effectively and appropriately in this instance? And again, once it had begun, once they had
once they sort of triggered it.
Yeah, that more extensive search, including the helicopter, including the Alpine unit, everything was done appropriately. They used their resources effectively and sufficiently in an appropriate manner. It's just that it should have happened 24 hours earlier.
Yep.
And that, as I said, they don't just show up. You've got to find them, they've got to be available, they've got to be skilled in the right way.
And they've got to travel to wherever you are.
Exactly. One witness did state that the police service and the rescue operations should consider additional training for personnel that are in areas with higher risk activities. So upskilling those that work at Jindabyne Police Station. I don't know how upskilled they are, but, you know, that could be a consideration. Or that they consider the use of third-party providers or commercial companies for specialised capabilities as like on standby services. So, for example, these expert witnesses that are regular backcountry skiers, you know, if they're part of like a commercial business or there's some sort of organisation that they run through, could you not reach out to them and be like, can we hire you as our search and rescue service and have you on standby with appropriate skills and training that this is okay? And that could be something that therefore could improve that resource availability. But I don't know how often people go missing in the Kosciuszko National Park. A police superintendent who appeared at the inquest also detailed that since Andrew's death, a local service agreement has been implemented with that local police station and a rescue and bomb disposal unit. This agreement allows local police to contact the unit in the first instance in circumstances where a coordinated police response is required for a missing person. This unit is then able to assist with specialised advice on how to best proceed, including identifying and sending specialised personnel. So just fast-tracking that situation, essentially. The coroner ultimately found that the search and rescue operation was conducted appropriately, other than the helicopter delay.
Yep.
And so the final recommendation given by the coroner was that there be a consideration given to providing further guidance on the completion of the search urgency assessment forms, including conditions, features, or terrain which may be considered hazardous, and equipment and supplies which may be considered adequate, so that they can appropriately fill out the assessment form so that the appropriate search and rescue can be commenced. And so that is my case.
Definitely agree that they should have started searching earlier, but it just so happens in this case it wouldn't have made a difference.
Yeah. You kind of know that going in, right? In terms of once they were like, he's not returned to his car, I'm like, I don't think this is going to be good.
Yeah.
Like, I was like, I don't think that there's going to be much chance because of the conditions that he was in.
Yeah.
You know, top of a mountain, snow.
And the fact that, the beacon hadn't gone.
Yes.
That makes you think that's something really bad.
Yeah, because he's not able to trigger it. Hey, that's really fair. But it's disappointing that they weren't, it doesn't seem like they were considering the family's concern nearly enough. Like, that justification that they were waiting for Andrew to make it back to Canberra.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
To me, I was like, what do you mean you're waiting for him? He's not got his car. How's he getting there?
Yeah.
And how difficult that would have been for the family to have dealt with at the time.
Because they would have been saying, no. Like,
no, that's not what he would do. He's not just going to hitchhike. Like, what?
And without his wallet.
Or his phone, or like, but he is carrying his skis with him.
Yeah. It's all okay.
Ski back to Canberra.
Yeah. And so for me, I was like, that must have been really, really challenging. And so it sounds like that's why they're advocating for these changes with this inquest.
Yeah, that's fair.
All right. Well, thanks for listening, everyone.
Thank
And
you.
we will catch you again next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.